For this sponsored session, please welcome to the stage Medidata CEO Anthony Costello, and to moderate, Stat's Senior Writer for Medicine and Editorial Director of Events, Matthew Herper.
Well, welcome to the Stat Breakthrough Summit West, Anthony. Your career story is really great. You started at Genentech 30 years ago, and you're an entrepreneur. You founded your first company, which was acquired by PRA Life Sciences, and then started a company called Mitris. Tell us a little bit about what Mitris did.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to see Zoe here. Thanks so much for your talk. I started at Genentech and, with a sociology degree and an emphasis in criminology, I went to Genentech. Knowing nothing about clinical trials at all, and fell in love with clinical trials in the process, and ended up starting a couple of companies. The last one, Mitris, that you talked about, was acquired by Medidata 9 years ago. And Mitris was founded to try to bring clinical trials more directly to patients outside of traditional site settings. So we built one of the first technologies with help from Pfizer and a bunch of investors. We built the first, what we now call decentralized trials technologies. Back then we called them virtual trials.
Meaning that you don't need to bring everybody into a big medical center in order to run the study.
Meaning that that you can support patients outside of traditional site visits, and not all the time. Many of the decentralized trials we do today still have some site visits, but there's more and more of the process that moves out of the site, making it less burdensome for patients, and also bringing data closer to the source, which I think is what a lot of us are focused on trying to do in this industry now, is just get closer to the source of data so that we can find answers for the research trials faster.
And what drew you to clinical trials? What was it that made this light bulb go on for the sociologist, criminologist?
My roommate got a job at Genentech and said, "You should come work here," and so I did. I honestly had no clue.
But it sounds like then you met and fell in love.
Yeah, fell in love. I loved the technology, which at that point, we talk. I think some of the sessions here today are really about this moment where we're taking technology that's already really great and we're sort of putting it on steroids. Back then, all of this stuff was done on paper. My job at Genentech was receiving paper data forms in FedEx packages from Genentech clinical research sites all over the world, and then running a team of people that would hand enter all of those pages of paper into a clinical database and then send all the queries or questions back to the sites in FedEx. And we had this FedEx back and forth for months just to find out what the data were telling us on the trial. And my biggest frustration at Genentech, because I was lucky enough to work on the Herceptin, what became Herceptin phase 3 trials, which were large international trials in breast cancer. And we knew that drug worked probably about 18 months before we got it through FDA, because just all the steps of the process at that point were so slow that we had these patients, waiting for a positive drug, and it was the process that was getting in our way. And that became the genesis of my first startup to kind of try to fix that.
Now, if you were able to talk to your younger entrepreneur self, what would most surprise them about where we are today with all this technology?
I think one of the biggest surprises to me today, and I'll call it a disappointment because I'm disappointed, is actually how little has changed over the last 30 years. We've successfully gotten off paper in most cases, although you still see it in some embarrassing trial designs. But we have done amazing things with technology, but we haven't done enough yet, in my view, to move the needle on how quickly we accelerate through these trials to get to a safety signal and an efficacy signal that can be delivered to a regulator. And I think a lot of that hesitancy is about willingness. I think that's the way we describe it when we talk about it at Medidata and we talk to our customers. The technology's there. I think you've seen a lot of sessions already today about just how fast things are moving. We're talking about last miles. We're talking about skipping processes like the jury Parents talked about skipping the lab process, for example, to just accelerate treatment. These things are taking big pieces out of the puzzle, but in clinical operations and just the block and tackle ways that we go from a protocol design to a final data set for a regulator, a lot of that stuff still remains much slower than it really should be or could be.
So when you're going to a sponsor and you're saying, look, we could really put your timeline on steroids, what kind of resistance do you hear? I mean, I would think I would want to say yes.
I would think you would want to say yes too, yeah. But it's an industry that is challenged to adopt new things. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about clinical operations. So it's fun to follow someone from OpenAI because they're just sort of blowing the doors off what's possible. And I couldn't hear that talk too well from backstage, but one of the things he talked about is access to longitudinal data. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we're very, very focused on in Medidata is similar. If you look at the world today, things like this Oura ring on my finger,
I'll be here later.
We're hyper accelerating not just longitudinal data, access to longitudinal data, but the things that we can do, the technology can layer on top of that to see a signal. So we have these 24/7 continuous data collecting devices on us. Most of us have electronic medical records sitting in sites that tell our entire history, even if you have to put them together from a few different institutions. These are the seeds of hyper-accelerating clinical trials. When we get to the point that we're actually able to leverage what this thing knows about my 24/7 monitoring, what my medical record knows, we can completely change the way we do this today, where an institution running a trial that I go to participate in takes some sort of 18-month snapshot of me because that's how long the trial ran, and they collect specific data points because that's what the
on certain days, my blood pressure when I'm in the doctor's office, when my BP is elevated because he scares me.
Yeah, or I come to my protocol mandated site visit 6 weeks after I had that headache that's going to get captured now as a 6-week-old adverse event, and what do I remember about it, and what medications did I take, and how did it resolve? Like, these are the things that complicate the signal detection that we want to see in these trials to sort of start them faster, kill them faster if they don't work, and get them finished faster if they are working.
And how far do you think we are from a world like that where we want to test a medical hypothesis? Patients are walking in not knowing whether they should get the current drug or an experimental one or even two current drugs, right? And a lot of the time when we pick a drug, it's just which one the doctor kind of has a favorite. And we can start randomizing people without all of these barriers, so we can collect a lot more data a lot more quickly. That seems like the obvious path.
We're so close. I mean, we're just right there. And again, that's why I use the word willingness, because the technology is there to do it. But when you bring this much new technology into a process that's been doing things the same way for a very long time, and look, I'm not trying to push the easy button on this. It's a heavily regulated industry. Our industry is always looking for regulatory signals that it's okay to do these new things. Then you've got crazy complicated international challenges around the management of personal health information and so on and so on. It's a complex environment, but we're this close to being able to say, yes, we're going to use continuous monitoring. We're going to use healthcare records. We're going to take some chances on new AI tools that can do this stuff much faster, and we're going to just sort of cross the chasm very, very quickly into a whole new way of thinking about what is becoming the long pole in the tent. And I think, this is one of the things I took from many of these sessions this morning is, on the one hand, if we hyper-accelerate molecular discovery and put many, many, many more new possible therapies into the pipeline, and then we're accelerating, no one's talked about it yet today, I'm surprised, but the new FDA initiative around real-time clinical trials is game-changing for our industry. If you're putting more stuff in the pipeline here, you're looking at it real-time on the other end and approving things much faster. What becomes the blocker, what we call the long pole in the tent, is this process in the middle, from protocol, starting sites, recruiting patients, collecting the data, measuring the data, analyzing the data, getting it to a regulator. That stuff will become the blocker. And what we're doing at Medidata is trying to speed up that whole piece. And there's a real opportunity to do it as far as the technology goes, but we need an industry that sort of wraps their minds around doing this stuff, reinventing themselves, transforming their own organizations to do all of that middle piece very differently after 30, 40 years of doing it the same way.
Amazing. Well, I look forward to seeing it happen finally. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have.
Yep, thank you very much.